My name is Sander, and I'm a big fan of coffee, cocoa, and the climate. And since you're watching, I'm going to bet that you are too. When you're like us, you love talking about how we can produce all the commodities we love so much while remaining within our planetary boundaries. This month in the Carblecast we're doing it slightly different, and I've asked my colleague Robert Jan to present 3 episodes about the European deforestation regulation. Robert Jan, take it away.
For this second EUDR episode, I talked with Camila Olmedo. Camila is the Regional Sustainability Manager at ECOM Latin America. Camila specializes in cacao supply chains, and she also has a say in the sustainability strategy of ECOM Latin America. Camila and I talked about the strong partnerships she sees unfolding within the supply chain, but we also covered the initiatives that help ECOM Latin America stay ahead of the curve. And we also talked about how the EU Commission can involve all the stakeholders within the supply chain. This was my talk with Camila Olmedo.
Yeah, please tell the audience who you are, what you do at ECOM.
I'm super happy to be here at the Carbel podcast. I think this is a great way to engage with different audiences and also learn in a community. I'm Camila Olmedo, and I'm Regional Sustainability Manager for Latin America with a focus on Peru and Ecuador. I'm working with over 6,000 small farm holders, and my experience has been mostly focused on cacao.
How do you see the industry responding to the EUDR within the cocoa industry?
So I see 3 different main topics that have been happening since this is official. One is an increased need for integration between what is commercial programs that are happening with the sustainability side. So for people that are more in the cacao, previously, for example, mass balance was a very common way of doing sustainability programs where you have the sustainability program in one country, but you're purchasing the beans from another country. And for example, certifications like Rainforest Alliance allow you to do this. But now there's an increased need of integrating the traceability with the commercial. So that means your sustainability program has to be like on your same supply chain, because from this is where you're going to get the GPS points, the polygons, and you will be able to pass, for example, the deforestation risk assessments. A second point, I think, is that there's more questions, of course, from our clients, mostly from clients that might be further down the supply chain or that have mostly focused on, let's say, quality. So these are clients that are looking for lower volumes but are focusing on niche chocolate products. And now they're more focused on saying, okay, now we need this traceability, and we need to also be able to make sure that we will be able to have our chocolate in Europe to process. So I think it's more us informing clients and now mapping it back to like our supply chain. So I think this is actually an opportunity because we'll be able to work more consistently with the same farmers. And I think that's the goal within sustainability and managing programs, at least for us. And finally, I think, well, this was already ongoing, but in the experience of Ecuador and Peru, there's a lot of strong partnerships that are happening and coalitions. For example, in Peru, you have the Coalición por una Producción Sostenible, which is basically having this coalition for sustainable production. And it's encompassing stakeholders from NGOs to even different traders that are in Peru. And this will allow, I think, for a learning community where we will be able to share best practices. I think we as ECOM are in a place that we were a little bit forward with the EUDR because we have been working on GPS points and polygons for a while. So, but maybe we need some help in other aspects. So I think it gives like a right way so that as a country and as a industry, we will be able to work towards the EUDR.
Going on to question 2, what are your practical concerns about the EUDR?
Given the import cutoff date, so data for being able to comply with the EUDR will need to be ready the start of 2024, 2025 main crop, which is typically like around August, September. So practically speaking, as we trade on long supply chains, we will need this data to be ready. So this is already like a lot of pressure for the supply chain from now, right? Like starting from now. But I think, what does that imply then on our work on a daily basis? I think one is supplier engagement. What does this mean? Yes, we work, for example, in Peru in a more direct supply chain where we're buying from small farm holders. But for example, in Ecuador, the supply chain works a lot more with intermediaries or supply chain partners, which might be a little bit, I would say, like, quote unquote, jealous with their data, or they will say like, why are you asking me for all this data? Even though we explain it comes from the EUDR, it will take some time from them to be able to share the data. And I think there is, of course, a keyword, which takes me to my second point of what are some practical concerns, which is exactly data, like integrating this data, how we are going to share this, the integrity of this data, and also the responsibility of who's going to be collecting this data. Because at the end of the day, the ones that are responsible to comply for the EUDR is the one putting the product in the country, but at the same time, there's a lot of partners down the supply chain to get that data. Another concern, of course, then it comes to saying, okay, there's a cost associated to collecting this data. So the question is, how is that cost going to be transferred? Is it going to come back to the farmer? Is it going to eat like part of what the farmer should be getting? Or will there be a mechanism where this data is, the collection of this data is not coming back to the farmer, which would be the ideal case? Another very important point, and this is something that we have been working on a lot, is false positives in deforestation. So what does this mean? When you do a remote satellite deforestation assessments, you can have up to, if I'm not wrong, from a 20 to 30% range of false positives, which means that the satellite data will say that a farm has deforestation when it does not. In our case, we have spot checked, and we've been to a sample of farms that were all red because they were being flagged for deforestation. So this means that we would penalize that farmer and we will take that farmer out of the supply chain. But when we went to visit, it was not deforestation. So it's not that clear. So what could happen if it's not deforestation? So one case is, for example, they had pruning, or they had a banana and they have cut the banana. So it seems like the leaves of the banana that are quite big are similar to deforestation. And when you go to the field, you don't see evidence of deforestation. So how would you see evidence of deforestation? Is basically seeing like the tree trunks, right, that are cut off, or you will see like a big log that is still a big trunk that's still like lying on the field. And I think an important aspect to this is then saying like, we will need that extra step of verification going to the field, because if not, we might be penalizing farmers for something that is, well, a technology limitation that we have at this moment, right? And finally, I think, and this is more like on a moral dilemma, we have had tough questions of some providers, or maybe some NGOs, or I think independents, that ask us basically why they need to comply with such scrutiny with basically no help that is being set at this moment, when at the end of the day, like, the farmers are trying to have a livelihood, to make their living, and there's no straight answer. And I think it's very important for us as a community to also get involved and understand like what are the root causes of deforestation, and really go more than just being thinking it as a single line and saying like, it's just straightforward. No, it's a complex issue, and of course it would have a complex solution. And I think the EUDR is putting a solution out there, like a way to have this bigger aim of not having deforestation, but it's a lot more complex than just saying, okay, no more deforestation, and that's just how it goes, right?
Okay, again, a super informative answer. I didn't know that about the banana plant prunings.
Yes, we were also shocked, I guess, when we went to the field, in the sense that you had like big issues. We were able to see in a map red areas, And then we were standing in that red area and there was like clearly no deforestation. And the second level of complexity there is also like what type of, and here I'm not the expert, actually Carble would be more of an expert, but which database you are using to filter out that deforestation, because we would have two different types of those data sets. And when you went to the field, you would have like red spots in different areas. So even those maps were not like the same.
Going to question 3, which initiatives do you see in the market?
I think I already mentioned the Coalición por Producción Sostenible, which I think is a great way to show how multiple stakeholders that could even be in a competing level at some aspects are getting together to share best practices and learn together and push also the local government so that it aligns with the EUDR. So I think that's a great example that's happening, for example, in Peru. But I would also speak then to what I know of. So for the work that we are doing at ECOM, basically, since we work very closely with our suppliers and farmers, we have been collecting geo-referenced farm informations and carrying out deforestation risk assessments for a while. And we have been, with the research and development team, challenging basically this false positive aspect. So saying like, how can we make this more accurate and how can we, like not penalize farmers in a wrong way. So our research and development team has been working in partnerships with universities, talking with different stakeholders them as well. And we are working on making that more accurate so that when we are doing the deforestation risk assessment, we can minimize those false positives. But I would also here mention that in addition to that, we have been able to collaborate with Mars. So they've actually recently published an article in the World Cocoa Foundation, if somebody wants to reach and research that. And basically what we have done with them, and in collaboration with other stakeholders too, is basically work on publishing a tool that will validate those false positives. So what does this mean? If in a deforestation risk assessment, we have a 30% of red. So red flag means that those farmers should be like left from the supply chain. We will do a sample on those and visit those to validate if it's real deforestation or not. So basically what Mars has developed, and for example, we have helped in a way where our colleague Cecilia has helped even in the translation and working how do the technicians on the field interact with the app so that we can actually field check this. Basically is a set of questions where we will be able to show if it was a real deforestation or not. And the whole process is published in the World Cocoa Foundation article that you can research. But I think that's a very proactive way. And I think I really like that Mars was very concerned of saying like we cannot take out farmers that basically are under a false positive, and that they were open in sharing this, of course, incorporating with field visits with us. And I think that's a highlight, because you would think this happens a lot, but it's hard. It's hard to, take your team, take them all the way to Peru, and Peru, it's a big trip. I remember we had to walk like 2 hours up a field, and I was like, is everyone okay? Are we getting there? The farmer was, of course, way ahead of us because they're very much accustomed to this. But yeah, it takes that type of work to be able to then create this tool to show the cases that are not going to be deforestation.
And now the last question is more like an advice question. So what would you, from a cocoa industry perspective, what would you advise the Commission, the EU Commission, going forward as they create new laws? What would you say, like, from that perspective?
Well, first, I think I cannot make advice on how to make laws, but I can give some advice on how we could help people that are on the ground, like companies, suppliers that are in the ground, to actually be able to apply that law. And I think and they are already doing this, is to continue conversations with stakeholders. And stakeholders are not only the big traders, you also have like small co-ops that are very concerned because they are super behind on the data aspect. And of course, this also has an implication with us at a certain level. If we work with a co-op and we need data from the co-op. The question is, who's going to get those polygons? Who's going to be responsible at the end of the day? Because you do need to share those files, and it needs to be good data. So there's a lot of questions, as I mentioned before, on like who bears the responsibility, who bears the cost. And I think there needs to be a continued conversation to understand this, so that with understanding this, the law can be like in a transition. So what do I mean by this? For example, in organic certification, there's a transition for a farm to become organic. And I don't know how this will actually roll out, because I know there's a hard deadline to comply with. But at the same time, I think there's levels of suppliers, there's levels of like internal capacities that you have in order to comply with the law. And I think there needs to be more thought into this, so that at the end of the day, I think the EU still wants chocolate. Countries like Peru and Ecuador still want to export cacao. So I think at the end of the day, there needs to be like an approach that will work throughout time, right? So that you have complied, but at the same time, there's data integrity behind that. You have built internal capacities within the countries, and we're pushing for progress and striving for progress and continuous improvement, rather than just a compliance of yes or no, because at the end of the day, in a no, I think everyone loses. Second, I would think that there needs to be a lot more thought into this false positives. I think it will be a learning process. Just as I mentioned, there's a tool that just came out, but I think the tool has, of course, its limitations. There's a lot of costs associated with this tool. So I think technology will improve, and I think there needs to be like a revision on this constantly, to say like, okay, how are we making sure that we're not penalizing farmers, and how can we include them again in the supply chain? Because it's important to note that there's also other markets that will not ask for this. And the easy way out for a farmer is to say, I will not sell anymore to you because you're asking me for too much. I will sell to this other guy. And finally, I think there's a need for funding and working on incentives. There needs to be funding, because there's a lot of, again, data costs that will happen. And at the end of the day, if there's not a correct funding mechanism, I think that the cost will come back to the farmer. And then also incentives in the way of, we've talked about payment for ecosystem services. We had the case where we looked at a farm in Peru, and basically he had production in 2 hectares, but he was owner of 6 hectares. The other hectares were basically what's called fallow land. So it's kind of a forest, but not really a forest. So the question was like, could we pay that farmer so that that fallow land is still giving him an income? And so he preserves it and he doesn't throw that out, and then he's under this deforestation aspect. But the question is, can we pay him for that? Because basically, yes, he's owner of 6 hectares, and basically he still needs to like make a living, because the 2 hectares is not like enough for his family and for his living. So I think there needs to be a push for that. And I think it would be great if the EU Commission can work on incentivizing this. And of course, again, there it would be looping back to the first point, saying, how do we speak with current stakeholders that are working on this? Because there's a lot of initiatives that have been working for several years already, and seeing like, how can we take this to the next level and make it scale, so it's not isolated projects that are happening, but are projects that are basically now the status quo. Like, I think that would be the goal, right? Having farmers that are being paid for preserving their forest, and not having that as an isolated project, but having that basically be the common aspect of what's happening.
Awesome. Thank you.
I learned a lot from my conversation with Camila. I hope you did too. Anyway, these were Camila's insights, and I actually want to hear your thoughts about the topic. So leave a comment, send us a DM or an email. You can follow us on LinkedIn or find us at carble.co.